Online dispute resolution, or ODR for short, can mean a wide variety of things. It basically consists of multiple different platforms and different processes to help the mediator get to a point where everybody is happy with the resolution. To me, online dispute resolution is actually just simply a marriage between technology, innovation, and easier access to justice. And I emphasize the word easier because the technology is really meant to be there to grease the path, to smoothen the journey for disputants to get to what they want.
Just to add on to what Asha had said, online dispute resolution is really a platform for dispute resolution to take place. And I think that a number of years ago, people would think of online dispute resolution as bringing your physical dispute resolution process online, meaning if you would have gone through a face-to-face mediation, you now use an online medium. So you do a video conferencing and you do your mediation that way. But I think over time, as technology has developed, online dispute resolution also can do more and means more. For instance, it could include sort of expert systems, right, which could onboard someone to the dispute resolution process, help them find possible solutions, right, and then take them to the next stage, right, which is so, commonly you start with a negotiation phase where you try and work between the parties, right, and your online system can actually help you by accepting your settlement offers, right, and sharing only what you want to disclose with the other side, but being able to bring you closer in that process. And then through mediation, you can then bring in a person if you needed to, right? It could take place online. And if you needed to escalate further to adjudication or arbitration, then again, the online platform can also make it easier, as you've said, Asha. Yeah.
Twenty 2020 has accelerated many of the changes which we have foreseen, but which didn't think that was going to take place until sometime further in the future. The difficulties in travel, the difficulties in, for instance, just getting different parties onto the same venue, difficulties with visa, the various restrictions in physical meetings have meant that hearings in court, in arbitrations, and even in mediations are either going to be curtailed or they will have to change the shape and form that they come in. So technology has thankfully stepped in, and technology, as Asha has spoken about, has brought us to a place where now we can do mediations even when we are not face-to-face. And I think it's exciting. What we have seen is probably just a tip of what technology can do to transform the mediation landscape. Eunice has also spoken about what more we can do with onboarding experts. Maybe you can even have a co-mediator, or sometime in the future, the possibility of having a computer running on algorithms to bring parties to a settlement. The potential, I think, is unlimited. 2020 has just shown us what technology can do, and I think it can only portend exciting changes and possibilities and opportunities in the coming years.
I think online dispute resolution didn't really take off because of COVID. It has already taken off a few years before that. So in the state courts in Singapore, they have started e-mediation already from 2018. And we've been talking about e-mediation across China, across the United States, the United Kingdom. There's been a lot of different motivations and ramp-ups towards e-mediation or online dispute resolution for the past few years. But yes, definitely COVID has speeded that up and brought a lot of things forward.
This is interesting as we look into the future and to see what more we can do with technology. I think some of the questions that people ask is that this is going to change the way in which courts have their hearings and arbitrations have their hearings and how mediation hearings are carried out. And one of the questions we ask is that will we one day perhaps have a computer or a robot, who sits as a mediator telling us human beings how to resolve our differences and our disputes? I think it's possible. I like to think I'm really pretty much a romantic and in how traditional ways sometimes work out better in matters concerning human relationships. Because we all know a big part of mediation is really to try to stop the leakage in the trust between parties, and you need a mediator who understands how parties feel, his experiences and his own emotional energy and healing that he can bring to a situation is very important. I'm not quite sure however high the level of artificial intelligence that we can put into a machine will be able to substitute that quality that a human mediator will be able to bring to a dispute. Sometimes when an arbitrator, a mediator, looks at a party in dispute, listens to how this person talks, looks at the body language, he has what I would consider an instinct to addressing the issue. And here's where I'll need a lot of convincing that at some point in time in the future, technology will advance to a degree where a machine, a robot, or a computer will be able to develop not just an algorithm to solve a problem, but an ability to have an instinct as to how best to place two warring parties onto a platform where they can decide to arrive at a solution for the best. I hope that I'll be proven wrong, and I think I'll be proven wrong. The events of the last few years have just shown us how wonderful technology can be, although I think we are still in the nascent stages of the development of technology and helping resolve human issues. But I think one day we will be there. I need a lot of convincing, but deep down in my heart, I have no doubt that it can be done.
Actually, some researchers have suggested that when comparing different roles in the future and what is most likely to be replaced by a robot or technology, that a judge is more likely to be replaced than a lawyer, right? A decision maker, because to replicate this process of decision making, it is possible to train an AI, right, based on the past cases. You feed it data so that it can pick up and develop its own way of coming to a decision. Right? But the work of a lawyer, and I would say mediator, right, a dispute resolution problem solver, is like that of a lawyer, because it is something that's a bit more dynamic than trying to make a prediction. It is also adapting, taking in information, processing it, listening, and identifying what is important to the client or the person. And what is important could well be completely unpredictable. Right? It could be a commercial dispute, but as we know and we have seen, at the heart of commercial disputes is sometimes an emotional relationship that has gone wrong, something that has escalated into a full-blown dispute. So that is where I think the human touch that Vi Ming was talking about is something that we should still maintain, even if we try and use technology more and more in the dispute resolution process. At FiDREC, we are now going through a digital transformation project, and we have relooked all the processes and thinking of ways in which we can enhance them. But I think one agreement that the team had was that what delights our customers and the people who participate in the process is the human touch and the human response. And whatever we do to make things more easy for them to communicate with us, for us to exchange documents and so on, that will improve their user experience, but we don't want to replace any sort of human communication with a robotic response in that sense.
I think having said that, I suppose we can use technology now to our advantage. Even now, I still think it's difficult to have a robo mediator to run the process, but I think it can certainly be useful as a resource, or maybe in some circumstances, in some instances, as a co-mediator. So for instance, one could say that based on an algorithm, the chances of your success, if you're the claimant or you're a defendant, is X percentage in country A, Y percent in country B, and a certain other percentage in this other country. And you decide, if we can't have a resolution now, these are your chances of winning or of losing. And I think that's useful because sometimes that may just be the nudge to push parties out of their stubborn position, and to get onto a position where they're more prepared to perhaps accede, to a position where they do not either lose entirely, although they may not win entirely.
As a technologist, as somebody who's been in technology for so many years, I have seen how it takes a long time for technology to actually ramp up. It takes a long time to smoothen out the kinks. So I feel that we should look at robo-mediation, or in the more accurate way would be the use of machine learning algorithms and artificial intelligence. Use that as a means to improve the efficiency and improve the neutrality of the whole process. So if you look at it that way from a positive angle, we can see that it's just going to help. It's going to be an extra tool in a mediator's toolbox or in a judge's toolbox to make the process more efficient, make the process more smooth, and make it more pleasant and get to an outcome that is satisfactory to everyone. ODR, or online dispute resolution, is not a new phenomenon. We've been doing our own form of online mediation for a long time, because really what it means is, what it entails is hybrid communications, any combination of hybrid communications. So for example, if you communicate in advance with emails to discuss information or sharing, or you have phone calls, or when you have online dispute resolution or online mediation, it doesn't only have to be on the platform that you have chosen to use for that particular session. For instance, if it was Zoom, but if there is an issue with the internet connectivity on that day, you might want to fall back to using WhatsApp or phone calls. So I think the most important thing is that the mediator has to be flexible and has to have a range of tools in his or her toolbox to be and also be adaptable to different methods of and different tools to use in case there's some issue, or in case there's a means that parties, the disputants have a preference for. So I think hybrid mediation, coming back to the question, hybrid mediation or hybrid forms of mediation is very common.
One question that I'm often asked is, did 2020 change the way FiDREC conducts our mediation? So in some sense, when we could not meet face-to-face, then we had to move some things online. But even before 2020, like you said, Asha, mediation takes place over the phone, through emails, although maybe not in exactly the way we envisage with a face-to-face mediation. And at FiDREC, for a number of years now, most of the mediations are actually concluded even before we convene a face-to-face mediation.
You are absolutely correct, Eunice, that there are challenges. And one of the challenges, I think, facing mediator is that how do you continue to project that impartiality, and what sort of skill sets you need? Because we all do know that one of the most important values that a mediator should have would be to present that sense of impartiality, right? That I will treat both parties equally. And you can't help a party that is participating this online, from feeling that I think I've been disadvantaged because there's a separation in terms of distance, right, from the mediator when compared to the party that is in the same room as he is. And soon that separation in terms of distance is going to manifest itself in a belief that we are now separated in terms of the level of trust and your ability to understand, what my problems are in this problem. So I think one of the skill sets which that mediator would need is to be able to break down those barriers, to be very sensitive to how that other party may be feeling and how he can address that. So he needs to be able to compensate, and yet at the same time not to overcompensate, so that the party that's in the same room as him feels that now this guy is swaying to the other side. So it's a tough challenge, and I think that he's got to deal with, and I think that's truly one of the challenges that he's got to deal with.
One thing is very important is for instance, setting up a standard operating procedure. So the mediation service provider, the MSP who's providing the service, they may need to consider things like making sure that both sides have access to the internet, making sure that there is sufficient familiarity with the platform, things like that will help smoothen the journey and remove some of the challenges for hybrid online mediation, as well as for even if it was a single platform online mediation, if you make sure, if you have ensured in advance that parties are familiar with the tools, then the journey will be smoother, and there will be more credibility and more trust and faith in the process.
And just to add on to what you said, Asha, about the mediation service provider having a standard operating procedure, I think now we see more and more of these being available. And there's also an international council on ODR who have published certain standards. And like you say, it goes to the details. Preparation for the mediation. Before, what do? You have to do a trial session. During the trial session, it is recommended you give parties a certain set of preparatory instructions, including down to the details, finding a quiet location, ensuring that the light is not behind you. Little things like that could also affect the conduct of the mediation. So I think it's just to add that there are certain international standards now that have been postulated and put up for discussion. And I think this is an area where if we all keep improving, trust can grow.
Indeed.
We were talking about skill sets a short while ago, and we all need to change. I mean, we need to adapt. We need to do better the things that are important in this day and age, and maybe to do less the things which are not so important. And in online mediation, I asked myself, what is the difference? And it depends on what role you play. Do you play the role as a mediator, as a counsel? If you play the role as a mediator, and I frequently, what I like to do is I like to come in a little bit earlier. I like to go into the rooms, the separate breakout rooms, and introduce myself and try to establish a rapport. Now, it's much easier to do that, when we are in a face-to-face physical meeting. But when we're not in a face-to-face physical meeting, I mean, you can still do sort of an online introduction informally, but I find it's just not quite the same. So the mediator would just have to be a little bit more focused. He's got to learn to have a little bit more patience, but he knows now that he's got to get the trust of the parties without that face-to-face meeting. Hello, crack a joke. It's so difficult to crack a joke over online, right? So he needs to be a little bit more focused in how that first approach is made, and he needs to be able to read the people a little bit faster. He needs to have some background checks before the first meeting. He needs maybe to be able to establish a rapport first with the lawyers. So that the mediator would need to be able to know exactly what his first word is going to be, when the cameras are switched on, and how he's best able to reach out to the parties. And I think that important first step is very important because it sets the tone for how the rest of the mediation is going to take place. From the point of view of a counsel, I think we need to be able to see how best to present ourselves online. Now, I think it's always very difficult to see myself, on a video, and I sometimes say that, look, I didn't mean to appear aloof or arrogant or somewhat disconnected in my thoughts, but where you are on camera, you are a little bit more self-conscious, and the communication comes out not the way you intended. So I think for lawyers, we need to also rehearse what we want to say and how we want to say it. We have to determine the message that we want to project to the other side. And I think it takes a little bit of rehearsal, certainly a lot more rehearsal when you're speaking into a camera than when you're speaking spontaneous in a room where your opponents and where the mediator and the friendly party are all together in the same room. So these are some changes that we have to learn to adapt. It's not nuclear science for many of us. These are changes that we can make, but we just need to be aware that an online presentation is very different, from an in-person presentation.
I'd like to echo what Vi Ming you said. I'm so glad you mentioned the word patience, because if you were to ask me what in a range of tools, in a range of skills, which skill would be most important for online mediation? I wouldn't say it would be technology or would be familiarity with technology. Technology really needs to be a hidden, silent partner in all this. It would be the responsibility, I think, of the mediation service provider to have that proper standard operating procedure, to make sure that the guidelines have been followed, so that technology doesn't feature too prominently in the mediation, especially if we want to have better and greater, wider acceptance of online mediation. I think the most important is not the familiarity with technology. We don't need to have lawyers and disputants to be very familiar with how to use tools. That will never happen, because we will have people, disputants and legal professionals from all ages and all backgrounds. We will never always get everybody at the same level. That shouldn't be important. I think what's important is, as you mentioned, patience. Patience with learning how to use the, patience with the tools, patience to, in order to be able to cope with the fact that sometimes tools may fail. And then secondly, you mentioned, Vi Ming, I couldn't agree more, is about establishing rapport. It's not easy to establish rapport online, but a mediator does have an arsenal of tools in his toolbox in order to be able to establish rapport online, which will be a little bit different from how you would do it if you were having a face-to-face mediation. So I would say these were the key skills that we should have for online.
I think so far in the discussion, we've focused a lot on the people skills, right? How you adapt your style of mediation so that you can still project that right connection, with the parties through an online media. But I'd also like to add on to two more aspects of mediation, which is process skills and problem solving. So for the process skills portion, if a mediator considers that there is going to be some online element in the process, they might want to think of when this element is introduced and what sits around it. Right? So for instance, many international commercial mediators now, in this climate of communicating online, they have come up with a framework where they would first start with an email exchange first, right? Set the ground rules. Email is a very effective tool to do that. Right? But they will also want to follow up with a phone call, right? Whether it is through video conferencing or a real phone call, so that gives you what some of the researchers call more richness, right? So in email communication, you have text, and you draw what inferences you will from the text. With the call, you have something a bit more. You have tone, you have the tone of voice, you have a sense of warmth, and with video conferencing, then you also have an added visual layer. So I think in terms of managing the process, a mediator who wants to engage in online mediation will also need to prepare and think about how they want to design the whole process. And next, problem solving. When you encounter a kind of roadblock in the mediation, Asha says there's this big toolbox that mediators will reach into to try and find the right tool. And with online mediation, there might be some different things in that toolbox than you would otherwise bring for a physical mediation. And this is where, as Asha, you mentioned, technology is usually seamless, right? But you might need to problem solve at various junctures, and you need those standbys and fallback plans so that your mediation isn't just cut off and there's zero, nothing happens after that. Right? So I think in terms of problem solving, there is an added dimension of it, not just problem solving in the sense of helping parties overcome an impasse, but problem solving to overcome any technological hurdles, challenges, imbalances of familiarity that Vi Ming talked about, so that you can best have that mediation process which achieves those goals, right? Another angle of that problem solving is also to do so while ensuring that parties still have their say. Yeah, so a mediator has to manage not only the parties, also the counsel, and sometimes when everybody is just a box on the screen, you might lose track, right, of who has actually been talking. And that is also something that psychological research shows us, fatigues people when you are communicating through an online platform. There is this element of added scrutiny. little comments might come across more harsh, like Vi Ming said, you don't intend to come across that way. But when the camera is so close to you, people actually just see your upper half, they receive a certain kind of signal. So that is also part of the problem solving. You need to have some knowledge about that. And that goes into the preparation that you talked about, right? And responding on the spot when you're actually conducting that mediation. Yeah.
I have an interesting story to share about one of the online mediations that I conducted last year before COVID hit us, it was a dispute between two parties who were very antagonistic, and I was actually scratching my head thinking, how am I going to make this work? And as we progressed with the mediation, things were getting better, but they were not picking up at the pace that I had hoped. And the one party noticed the other party had a koi pond behind her, and of course, they were not able to agree on, at that point, they had not agreed on settlement until the party who noticed the koi pond asked if he could have one of the koi fish, because she had quite a few in her tank, and she was actually somebody who raised koi fish as a living. And she said, well, if I offer you a pair of my prize koi, can we call it a deal? And we all waited with bated breath, and he said, yes. So this is another instance, where I think online mediation helped, because had they done that mediation in the court, where we were supposed to have been having it, this would never have happened. I'm not sure if we would have reached a settlement agreement. So in addition to technology-related disputes, in relation to disputes where distance is important, I think another area is where you can see your other side, the dispute, the other disputant's family background or surroundings, and that brings a human element into it, and that brings a sense of warmth, and that can help bridge the gap and come to a conclusion.